Hey guys, welcome back to another episode of the Mind Muscle Connection podcast. Today I have a guest episode, and my guest today is Laura Savino. So if you're not familiar with her, she is the founder of EPN Nutrition and the Practical Athlete, and she's a former engineer as well too. And so she has a ton of knowledge around performance, body composition, navigating between both of those there. So what we discuss in our conversation today is her current training. She's training for a multi-day hike. So what that looks like. How we also discussed how to train the gut to handle carbohydrates, right? Especially when you need such a high amount of carbs that she has. Digestion issues during, say, higher calorie phases, some things to look out for, some things to watch. Also, how to be able to get in enough calories in, again, to have your gut be able to handle all that. We talk about her current challenge around her SIBO that she has. So some gut issues we discuss. We discuss why she's currently in a deficit, how to manage a fat loss phase during performance. That was a big thing that we discussed throughout was, again, just how you can navigate that challenge and how, we don't necessarily think that is the right thing to do most of the time. We also talk about hunger management during that phase and the training program structure that she currently has. We also briefly discuss some recovery strategies and supplements during this time and how she's actually going to fuel during the hike and some interesting things around that. Definitely an awesome episode. Hope you enjoy it. If you do listen to this, make sure you tag Laura and I on Instagram so we can share it. If you haven't yet, make sure you give me a follow on Instagram, Jeff HOEHN _. That's where I'm most active on social media. If you find this podcast to be helpful in any way, if you could leave a rating and review, that will help more people find it. And then finally, I have my free body recomp checklist. And within that, I go over 10 things you need for body recomp, 2 different types of body recomp, why it's important to focus on body recomp over just scale weight, and my favorite training splits, and then much more as well too in that. So make sure you grab that. Again, it's completely free. And I hope you guys enjoy this episode with Laura. Laura, welcome back to the pod. I was just pulling this up. This is your 5th time on, so pretty good amount there. Last time we had you on was early January of 2025, so it's been a little over a year. So how's everything going for you? And thanks for coming back on too. Always look forward to chatting with you and just picking your brain and having a good old discussion here around some good topics. So
yeah, thanks for having me. Honestly, it's been great. It really helps when we get to chat because I have my clients sending me some of your pods and then I go, hey, go listen to this one. So it's always a good overlap when we can reconnect because they really enjoy hearing from the way our brains work for sure.
Yeah.
But it's been a lot. I think last time since we last chatted, I moved to Texas and otherwise we've just been cooking with business.
When did you first move to Texas again? I forgot what the exact date was.
Technically end of June last year. Yeah.
How's the transition been? Do you miss, I guess you don't get to go snowboarding as much as you were previously.
No, it's been a little challenging. I will say that the culture in the area that we moved it to, I wasn't quite expecting what it was going to be like, but it's nice to be closer to Matt Scott. My husband, Matt, has some family there, so we get to see our nephews regularly.
Nice.
The food is great. To be honest, like the restaurant quality in Texas, they do food really well. They don't do outside very well, but they do food well. So I'll call that a win. But yeah, it's been a transition for sure.
When you say they don't do outside as well compared to Colorado, is that what you mean?
I don't even know any of my neighbors because I have never seen them outside their house. And normally I'm out there walking my dogs like twice a day. And
yeah,
I know they have kids because I can hear the violins playing like through the windows, but I've never seen the kids. So
do you think it's weather related or is that just...
I think it's cultural. I'm not sure. And for context, guys, I'm talking specifically about the North Dallas area, which is a little bit more of this is a little more ritzy of an area in Frisco. And so it's just a different culture thing. I think a lot of people do a lot of indoor things because from April to October, it feels like you're outside in a convection oven. And then you get 2 cold months. And I think people find more activities to do inside. How
do you feel about that coming from Colorado? Because I feel like Colorado's interesting where I feel like you get some heat, but it's probably a little bit lower than that most of the time. And then you obviously get the extreme of some snow and cold and stuff like that.
I love being outside. So I have been trying to make it work. I thought I would be able to make it work a little bit better, but I had to finish training for a massive hike I did last August up in New Hampshire, which was 10,000 feet of elevation gain over 2 days, 40 miles. And I had to finish that training in Texas. And I did a lot of indoor training, but I was like, let me get some time on feet outside. And so my thought process when it's always going to be 100 degrees out and 100% humidity, I was like, I'll go at 5 a.m. I'll go when it's dark out because it seems like a good opportunity. That way I can take the dogs, can exercise them. And what I didn't expect at 5 a.m. is you get outside and the humidity is the highest, like right before dawn. My zone 2 walking with no incline, I was at zone 2 because it was so hard to breathe in the air. That was wild to me. And that was like 2 weeks post coming out of living at 7,000 feet elevation and coming down to sea level and just being like, I can't believe how hard it is to breathe because of how thick the air was at 5 a.m. Like it was walking in a cloud. So that was an adaptation to make.
It's interesting. You had two different adaptations there that would make your intensity go up way sooner than what you expect with altitude. And then obviously the heat, with my home gym, we have it in the garage and I don't have basically whatever it is outside, that's what it is inside. And in the Midwest, it's like you get these really cold winters, you get really warm summers. And so like I have worked on both sides. The winters, the cold side of things is more so like just getting out there. And once you get out there, you're fine. It's not as bad. Yep. The heat, you could just tell it's like everything you do is way tougher. So it's like, I don't really know. People have asked me which one I like better. I'm like, I honestly don't really know. Probably the cold, right? It's just getting that initial little bit and it's just dark and whatnot. But the heat is tough. How did that translate to your hike?
So I'm not sure the heat really helped in the hike, but I will say that I did do a ton of time on Stairmaster, tread hills, doing all those things. So you can train for some crazy elevation at flatlands because you just have to utilize some different tools. And maybe the heat actually helped a little bit because this was in New Hampshire and they were like, oh, they were a little bit warm and I was fine. I was in my tank top and shorts and they're like, oh, I'm sweating. And I'm like, at this point, I've been doing this in 105 degrees. And so when you come here and it's sunny and 75, it just doesn't get better than that for hiking weather.
Yeah, I guess that is what the literature says on the heat is like, that's where it's like it just really just makes things tougher. And there's really unless you're not really training in the heat, it's like, unfortunately, there's not a ton of adaptation that you're going to get. Whereas I feel like from altitude, you could probably get a little bit out of that. Like you're going to be able to maybe get a little adaptation from training high and then doing something that's at lower altitude. Has that been your experience with that or?
Oh, 100%. I spent a lot of time crisscrossing from living at 5,000 to 7,000 and then coming back down. And I will say that first week of getting to sea level, you feel like Wonder Woman, right?
Yeah.
Like everything is easy. Oxygenation is easy. And then you come back up here and you're like, oh God, like I got to drop 20% in weights on my lifts because I'm hitting zone 4 on a bench press. And that doesn't make a lot of sense, but it just is what it is.
Yeah. Because the heat, like you said there, the only way that would really transfer is, like you said, then it really get any given temperature. It's because you were training in the heat. It just felt a lot different, probably a little bit easier. So I guess that could be a small transfer, but still nothing crazy there. Cool. What in terms of what you're doing now? So you're training, I can't remember the exact name of it, but maybe fill the audience in on what you're training for right now.
Yeah. So after doing the Pemi Loop, that hike I did back in August, we decided to do a trip with some of our clients to do the Tour de Mont Blanc. And that is it's almost like a little over 100-mile hike starting in France. You hike from France into Switzerland, into Italy, and then Italy back to France. And it is around Mont Blanc, one of the big peaks in the Alps.
You said it's a month long?
No, it's 100 miles long. Sorry, I might say that. We're doing a week.
Gotcha.
We're doing it in a week. And we're doing a little bit of an express route. So we're cutting off some of the options so that we can make it all the way around in a week. But it is a lot of elevation. And I think we're going to do 34,000 feet over 7 days. Don't quote me on that, but we have it's a lot of work. So right now we're in prep season for that. We're 19 weeks away from this trip. And part of it is getting ready to do and be able to do that. And so being able to hike 7 days in a row, 8 to 12 miles a day, 3,000 to 5,000 feet of elevation per day is a lot. And getting your legs ready to do that, getting your cardio ready to do that, and also getting your gut ready to do that. Those are like 3 big pillars when it comes to prepping for a hike like this, because you have to be ready. For the one I did back in August, I ate 6,000 calories a day and over, I think, 1,100 grams of carbs both days of doing that hike. And you have to be ready to be able to fuel appropriately for that kind of activity. You can't just like wing it to get there.
Yeah. No, you said you were doing you said 6,000 calories at 1,100 grams of carbs. Is that what you said?
Yes. Yeah.
That's an insane amount for sure. Like I don't think people realize like how many calories and carbs that would be. I feel like when calories get that high, people are like, oh, I could easily do that. I'm like, okay, yeah, maybe in one day of literally just all crap, but you're not like to have to do that for consistently. And probably some of the foods that you were eating, that can definitely be a tough thing to do because that is a lot of calories there. So I guess on that real quick, I think that is interesting. So like when you say get your gut ready, like what does that kind of look like? What are some things like, why do you need to do that? And what are some things that you're doing there?
Yeah, I think it's pretty standard for a lot of our clients to come in, go, oh, I can't have anything in my stomach when I train, or I can't have anything in my stomach when I do cardio. And that just doesn't work if you have to go hike 8 to 12 miles doing, and 8 to 12 miles sounds easy until you're doing 5,000 feet of elevation and it takes you 8 hours. Like the pace is hard and you need to be able to eat through that or you are going to fail on this hike or you're going to get injured. And part of the training is a big part of it is training your gut to learn how to process carbohydrates in the hike. And a lot of times people don't want to train is because they aren't necessarily eating optimal foods for going to train on your stomach too. So sometimes I'm going to eat a full like egg, bacon, sausage, breakfast, and then go train. Of course, you're not going to feel that great. You're going to feel like a brick in your stomach because you just ate 40 grams of fat before you went into it. And so part of the optimization, gut optimization process is testing out different carbohydrate sources that work for you, usually some blend of glucose and fructose, so that you can get your gut up to processing, ideally 60 plus grams of carbs per hour while hiking, which is a lot. It's 250 calories an hour that you have to like just intake. That's not even counting your meals. And practicing and testing different sources is like part of that training process for sure. And are you somebody who wants to chew things? Are you somebody who wants to maybe drink those carbs? Do you want to use them as like a gel or a liquid? And finding out which of those sources kind of works best for you is a big process of getting your gut ready.
So it's figuring out what works for you. Is there anything in terms of like titrating up food that you would necessarily need to do as well too? If someone doesn't consume that amount of carbs, is that something that you would do, or do you feel like you don't necessarily need to do that?
You can. I would say at the very least, we can't just start out, oh, I'm going to start with 20 grams of carbs now. If you're going to go out and do these intense things, we have to figure out how to eat around it. So usually I'll start with somebody with something super easy. It's bring some dates, or a little bit of juice can usually do pretty well, where it's just easy if you can start at like 30 to 40, but pretty quickly I'm going to push you right into 60, because if you're with me and we're working on this training plan, we're eating carbs before we go. We're not going to throw you into a training plan that you aren't even adequately eating at maintenance first, and you're not eating an adequate amount of carbs first. If you're listening to this and you're in a deficit and you're trying to do this and you haven't trained your gut in carbs, you're going to have a little bit of a pain point troubleshooting too, because you might not be ready to eat that level of carbohydrate.
So you're saying for most of your clients, it's like you're already going to be eating enough anyways to where that shouldn't be problematic. You're not going to have somebody fat loss dieting heading into this anyway. So like you would already kind of have that period of time to where you've been eating enough.
Yeah, generally that you guys have done the work of going, okay, I understand how to eat 200 plus grams of carbs per day. And now it's just testing some of those sources and making sure they're easy to digest sources. Because I have had a few clients who have worked with us go, I told a group last night, we do group cohorts over at EPN, and two of them are doing the Mont Blanc trip. Two of them are running a marathon this year. And we were talking about some of their carb loading protocols. And they're like, Laura, we have to forget everything you've ever told us about eating a primarily whole food, nutrient-dense diet. Yeah. I'm like, yes, because in this scenario, if you try to, whether it's a performance phase or a build phase, eat all your calories from whole foods. Like I had one client decide that she was going to eat like black beans, rice, and like 4 bagels as her carb load for her first half marathon. And I was like, this is a really poor life decision. Your GI is not going to behave. And she's like, I can't drink juices. Like juices are bad carbs. And I'm like, you can drink some juice. Like we can do this. She's like, no, I'm going to do it my way. And she did it her way. And she was not having a good time on race day and came back and drank juice the second time. Was like, oh yeah, okay, you're right. Like we got to protect the GI, because your GI cannot handle processing and breaking down a lot of more difficult to eat carbohydrates at that point.
Yeah, I always tell people eventually it gets to the point, and this is where people that are doing these like long distance events and stuff like that, it's at some point there's going to be a digestion sort of bottleneck where it's like you have to be a bit smarter. And almost like you said, what you would typically tell people from a fat loss perspective, you'd flip that on its head, do the opposite to actually get that in. I always tell people people want to talk about trying to increase their maintenance calories as high as they can, or trying to increase their total daily energy expenditure as high as they can. And I'm like, there's always a bottleneck from either like a time perspective, recovery perspective, just how much food you can give your body, right? Because it's like eventually you just can't keep shuttling that in. Like your GI tract's not going to be able to handle it. So you have to find ways to get that in there. And real quick, you mentioned, I think you said it was black beans, rice, and bagels. Out of those, yeah, were the black beans the most problematic specifically, or what would you say? Or is it all of it, just a combination that there?
So let's back into this. The issue that a lot of people come into doing like a carb loading or have to eat more carbs phase is they go, okay, I'm going to eat my typical nutrient dense meals and add carbohydrates on top of them. And that is the issue, is that if you say, oh, my typical dinner will go chicken, black beans, rice, salsa, a burrito bowl. That is a really nutrient dense meal and it's already very filling. And if you need to add 50 to 100 grams of carbs on top of it, that's where we get into trouble. So usually when we're trying to eat a lot of carbohydrates, I'm going, hey, no beans or no rice, or like maybe a bit of rice and a courtesy bit of veg. Don't throw 5 ounces of bell peppers on there, put 2 to 3 ounces, and then make those a little bit more easy to digest. So instead of maybe putting it on 200 grams of rice, maybe you're putting them in tortillas, right? Tortillas are a little bit easier to digest. They're pre-digested. There's a number, that's the usual issue I see, especially with my female clients, is they are taking those really nutrient-dense meals and trying to add easy to digest carbs on top of them. And instead, we need to pull out those slow digesting carbohydrates and replace them with fast digesting carbohydrates, or you're going to have that GI distress. I'm eating a lot less rice and a lot less baked potato and a lot less beans and legumes in that season, and or mixing it or replacing it with some easier to digest carbs. Like bagels are great, but bagels on top of a meal with rice and beans in it are going to be tough.
It's the overall, not just necessarily that by itself. Like bagels, like you said, would work, but it's also what is that with in combination? Like again, oatmeal, beans, things that are usually higher in fiber, going to be the ones that are problematic. What are some actual like symptoms and things that people will experience?
Usually we'll get a lot of bloat, a lot of gas, a lot of burping. You're just like, everything just feels like it's moving really slowly. And then the overly full feeling, oh, I didn't eat carbs on my run because I just felt so full. And I'm like, that's not the problem. Like we should be feeling very similarly GI wise to we are at maintenance. And that's where everybody's like individual tolerance to how much slower to digest carbs versus higher to digest carbs is different. So you have to figure out where you're on that scale. But going, hey, I shouldn't be feeling that much different than I am at maintenance. And if I am, or if my GI is really upset, that's going to be a barrier to us utilizing some of those carbs for those intra-workout activities. And so that's where I look at and going, hey, where do you feel? Like, do you feel great? Do you feel like bowel motility as well? Do you feel like everything's moving? Do you feel well fueled for your workouts? Cool, we're in a good spot. If you're not feeling that way, then I'm going to be starting to pull out some of those beans, rice, potatoes, and starting to be like, hey, we got to maybe fully replace these in the meals versus pulling back on that quantity.
Does timing, obviously timing is important, but just from a gut standpoint, how important is the timing aspect of it? Or again, does it ultimately come down to just the overall pattern of the diet there? Does that make sense what I'm asking?
Yeah. So timing definitely matters. And I think one thing I would differentiate here is like in a surplus, we're just trying to eat that food amount every single day, and carbs around your workout, great, ideal, but not the most pinnacle piece of it. As long as you're having your nutrients covered and you're eating enough somewhat spread out relatively evenly throughout the day, and you're having a meal around your workout, check the box. In a performance maintenance phase where you're training for a hike or where you're training for a run, training for any of these big endurance events, you are eating your kind of typical meals, and then all those carbs are concentrated in that training session. And I don't want you to go, okay, Laura said 60 grams of carbs per hour. I'm about to do a 2-hour run. I'm just going to chug down 120 grams of, I don't know, orange juice, carbs. That's not going to work out so well. So generally speaking, people tend to feel better spreading that out every 20 to 30-ish minutes. And you can test and adjust that for you. So there's a lot of gels that are 20 grams of carbs or 30 grams of carbs, and you can go, okay, at every 30 minutes on the minute, I'm sucking one down, or every 25 minutes. Or some clients I like a little bit lower dose per, and they go every 15-ish minutes because maybe they're hiking and they've got a little bag of the Nerds gummy clusters. They're like, I just pop 2 every 15 minutes and that works for me. And so spreading it out throughout that training session is important. And then also going, what's that timing that works better for me? I kind of like the every 20-ish minutes, 20, 25 works well for me. But again, this is part of the practice of going, what does that look like for you when you're testing this in your pre-training leading up to the event?
Yeah. So that's obviously where you're at, like right now, is the testing out, right? In terms of what's going to work best for you there. So I guess to come back to what you are currently doing, do you have that down? Are you messing with that? And then I think you said in your hike in August, the New Hampshire one, that was the one that you had to have 6,000 calories, 1,100 carbs. What does this one look like? Because this one's spread out, right? Where it's a week, which to me could present some unique challenges as well too, with being further spread out, maybe less food. I don't know. I'm curious to hear what that kind of setup looks like.
Yeah, I'm currently in prep for this, and I think we're going to touch on this right after this. I am actually technically, guys, so full disclosure, I am working through a SIBO protocol, small intestinal bacterial overgrowth, which was probably triggered from my training, or re-triggered. I've had it for a while and I was in remission before I did this training for the Pemi Loop, and then eating that many carbs was a big stress on the gut. And honestly, I have a very adaptive metabolism, so having to eat as much as I had to eat for that hike did not do me did me a little bit of dirty in the training.
Real quick, it's when you start talking about performance related things, it's like you unfortunately have to push through some, right? Obviously over time you want to get better at figuring that out, but you might have to push through some things, and it may not be greatest from a health perspective, but sorry, go ahead.
No, exactly. And so eating like this is not the best option for your gut. If you want to do the most, you have to eat the most. And when you eat the most, you have some ramifications that we have to work through. So I am wrapping that up right now, but part of that SIBO protocol requires you to eat a lot. Unfortunately for me, I had to actually go into a deficit because my carbohydrate requirement and maintenance is so high that I had done 2 rounds of antibiotics and it just did nothing because I'm still having to eat like 2,800, 2,900 calories of maintenance. And that was just really tough. So went into a intentional deficit currently in order to
you are
allow the
currently in a
protocol to work.
deficit.
I'm currently in a deficit and basically really big focus on meal timing and keeping food consolidated to specific meals along with some supplementation to help GI get back into a better balance and let those good bugs crowd out the not so good bugs. But yes, I'm currently in a deficit, but I have to wrap this up. And part of the planning here, working with my doctor, was going, hey, I have to be done 16 weeks out to this hike because 16-week outs for us is where we get into really intensive training. And I cannot tolerate, and nobody should be going to like higher intensity hill training and treadmill training along with being in a deficit. That's a no man's land. So let me circle back to your question about what does this hike look like? Guys, if you do not recall, I cannot eat gluten and I cannot eat dairy. That is a no-go. For most of our members who are going on this trip who can eat gluten and dairy, they're going to have the best time of their lives because part of this trip they get to hike. We go through little small towns. You can buy a croissant at every stop. Like there are ample opportunities to fuel along the way. And if you can have a croissant every single day of your hike or a baguette on top of a mountain, that sounds pretty awesome.
Good calories. Good amount of calories.
Good calories. Good fueling things. And actually part of we are having a chat with these guys, but I'm like, hey, we're maybe not going to use as many gels in your training because that's not what fueling is going to look like on the mountain, right? So maybe if you guys were doing a marathon or a half marathon, you might be doing a lot of gels because that's how you were planning to fuel for the race. But on the mountain where we're going, that's not going to be the case. Your actually fueling is going to look a lot more like baked goods and some pastries. And so rather than having them only use typical performance carbohydrates, which is like carb powders and gels and gummies and whatnot, I am going to recommend, hey, throw in some pretzels, throw in like some sourdough toast, or if you can make a little peanut PB&J sandwich, because that's going to more mimic what that race looks like, which is a little unusual from a training perspective, but we want to be training our gut for that, not training our gut for a situation that we're not going to be replicating. So that from like a training gut perspective, that is my recommendation to my people. But again, I cannot eat any of those things. And so after talking to like our travel provider, I actually am going to end up probably bringing a lot more carb powders. My preference is doing a little bit more, like truly doing a lot more liquids. I am a water hog when it comes to these trips. I will drink 2 gallons a day. And so for me, it's a lot easier to just throw like a 50-gram carb packet in every water bottle. Just to make
versus also drinking and then trying to eat on top.
Yeah. So for me, that's my easiest go-to. And then I'll pack that with me. And if I have the opportunity to have some like gluten-free baked goods and they happen to be there that are also dairy-free, I 100% am going to take advantage of it. But the recommendation I've had is that it's not always going to be an option. And so to have some backup for that trip is what I'm going to do.
So you're in a deficit right now to work through your sort of the gut issue, the SIBO that you're going through right now. However, that's going to end in 10, what do you like 10, how many, like 10-ish weeks or so?
I'm at 10-ish weeks and I want to be out. I have to be out of it by April 13th. So that'd be 13 weeks.
So you got 3-ish weeks left of doing it this way. So what will your fueling requirements be for this hike that you're going to be doing? What does that look like?
Yeah. So I'm actually, one thing that I think is important is and I've already week 6 of the training plan done. Right now, I am fueling intra now. I think one mistake that people make is if they start sprinkling in some of these longer doses of cardio in a deficit is that they don't eat anymore on those deficit days. And so from day one of this going, hey, I'm really mapping out this SIBO protocol, trying to minimize carbohydrate intake as I can. There was a carb out that was like, look, I can't put myself in the hole from a performance perspective, from a catabolic perspective, from bonking and having some bad boomerang hunger ramifications. And so I am still doing 60 grams of carbs per hour currently. And that looks like dried mango and squeeze packs. I love the like dried mango squeeze packs, applesauce squeeze packs, any of those things. So I will knock those out when I am currently training. But what it looks like is right now in order to bring my carbs under 200 for this protocol, I'm eating about 2,000 calories a day. And then on those days that I'm training currently, I'm still eating plus 60 grams of carbs per hour when that comes up. So maybe if I have a hill day this week, it's looking like I'm gonna eat 2,300 calories because I've got an hour and 20-minute hill session in there. So the fueling doesn't stop because I'm in a deficit. The fueling is even more important because I'm in a deficit. It does add some ramifications though, right? And so I just said that I'm still eating like squeeze packs and like some liquid carbs. That doesn't really pair well with hunger management in a deficit, right?
100%. Yep.
I am modulating those sessions though. The intensity is really important if at this point with the lower recovery ability, because I'm not eating that much, I'm really honing in on keeping these sessions to like zone 2 or zone 2 heart rate intensity. Because if you guys don't watch me, but if you're seeing this, you'd be like, oh, Laura keeps stopping like every 50 feet up this kind of steep incline, but I'm trying to keep my heart rate down because I can't just blast up the hill and hit super high heart rates and then also expect hunger management to be in line the rest of the day, even with adequate fueling. So still fueling that every 20, 30 minutes, still doing these sessions, but also trying to modulate intensity. And it also makes, honestly, the deficit data analysis really tough. Like scale wise, it's all over the place. So you have a high carb day, high inflammation day, high sodium day, because I'm doing some extra electrolytes intra-session. You really cannot use the scale right now. Like I can tell you that things are going. I'm hungry. I can see photo progress. I can absolutely see measurement progress. I can tell that all these things are moving, but the scale is the least helpful factor at the moment, and it's not a decision maker at all.
Yeah, that's a good point you bring up, right? Especially if you have a high output. That's a mistake people make in a fat loss phase, I feel, is when they have high output, they also don't modulate their calories around it. You still need to create a deficit, but if you are doing more training, like you have to increase your calories a little bit more than what you would think. But like you said, the trick is still trying to get into a deficit because then you have the hunger issues. There's so many things and it can become fairly complicated. I definitely feel like probably, like you said, like meal timing becomes super important, especially around training. Like you said, managing your training intensity is going to be super important there. So just to backtrack though real quick. So with this, like what you're going through, the biggest reason you need to be in a deficit is just to give your gut a break, right? Is that sort of the main reason that you're doing it? Okay.
That was the main reason. And that's actually why I stopped in January. But the problem is that started overlapping with the training plan starting for this hike. And so about 6 weeks into this deficit, I had to start going, okay, like I'm getting to a point where some of this fueling is required. And also I'm currently in Tahoe right now. It's snowboarding season. It's not so much, it's spring now, but it was snowboarding season earlier, and you can't snowboard half day and not also fuel. And so there's just been some requirements where I'm like, okay, I have to eat during these things because my output is quite a bit higher.
It's on a perfect. So obviously if you weren't going through this, I'm assuming your goal would be what, maintenance? Like that would be where you'd be trying to hit if you weren't having any of these GI issues or anything like that.
I would say currently, if the GI issues were not out the window, my spring deficit would have already been done. My build is over and I'm fully in a performance maintenance phase. And that's just not currently the reality of the situation.
So you would have done a fat loss phase anyways, but you just had to extend this one into getting ready for this. And so you would ideally like to be at maintenance right now is there. Okay.
Yes. Yeah.
So the cool thing, like obviously, if you want to look at this from a cool thing, it's like, it does give you some data in terms of how can you potentially manage this if you need to, right? But I think the big takeaway is, and I'm sure you would tell your clients this is, okay, ideally, if you are getting ready for a hike or performance related thing of this magnitude, you wouldn't be trying to fat loss diet. Like you ideally would be doing that outside of the preparation phase for this, because as we're talking about here, like there's some unique problems that you're going to run into that you have to work around and be smart about. And I also would think that a huge modulator to all this too is going to be your body composition, right? Like I guess the fact that you maybe did a building phase and again, maybe you weren't necessarily your leanest probably is helping you out a little bit here as well too. Whereas if you went into this like pretty shredded, it'd be even worse at that point. So I think body fat's percentage is a huge modulator to all this. So I guess I'm curious then to go back, like what you mentioned hunger there. What are some things that you're helping manage that part of it?
I think, okay, so agreed. I would say to clients that generally speaking, we just separate out these phases. Like, Bill, what's your 52 weeks a year look like? How do we separate out our performance and fat loss phases? Because usually if you have a fat loss goal, you want to make a big chunk of progress in that phase. And so when we start blurring the lines and doing both, a lot of wheels get spun and hunger management is really hard. And so things that I'm doing right now is my nutrient density is incredibly higher than I maybe would do in any other fat loss phase. And I say this in that my plate is like 50 to 60% veg volume. I'm trying to get a lot of prebiotic and probiotic fibers in. I'm trying to get a lot of fermented foods in. Eating in a way that I would say that most people be like, oh, that's so much veggie. That feels like a lot of work. It's a lot of work, but I also have to manage hunger because the activity is high and the output is high. And so managing a deficit rather than going, okay, if you're 90-10 in your calories in a deficit, so 90-10, if you're looking at a 2,000 calorie day, that's 200 calories of fun foods, 1,800 calories of high density foods. I'm looking at 95.5, 97.3, because you still have those hunger cues from the activity, and that activity, additional carbs, is not satiating carbs. It is carbs required to fuel for the activity. So there are some trade-offs too. And I think that trade-off can be tough for people to manage if they're not veggie lovers. I have a couple clients, I'm sure you do too, that are like, I don't really love a vegetable. Do I have to eat another potato? I'm like, if you want to do the things and you want to manage hunger, like we want to pick those really highly satiating plates, and we want to do those plates on repeat. And so when I think about those are some trade-offs that I'm making right now, is going, hey, I'm not fitting in any fun foods, or I'm minimizing them as much as possible, because it makes the hunger management and the meal blueprint piece easier when activity is higher as well.
Yep, that makes a lot of sense, because that would be, like you said, the tricky part. I think the other tricky part would be if you were in this situation is I would imagine that some of these more calorie dense foods taste pretty good too. And like the trick is also like really moderating that, because I feel like once you start to combine deficit, high output in your situation, like watching, adding in that stuff to help fuel your training, it's like that stuff I feel would taste even better and tougher to moderate as well too in a deficit.
I hear you on that one. I actually will slightly disagree, just in the point of, if you're coming from living your life at maintenance year round or in a surplus, and the fuel that you choose to bring, I would say if you're using candy, like that's probably a poor life decision right now. Yeah. But if you're using kind of like dried mango or like dates and things like that, or the carbohydrate powders, which sort of taste like, I don't know, hint of strawberry lemonade. It's not even like a true strawberry lemonade. It's like, here, you're somehow drinking 50 grams of carbs, yet it tastes like you're slightly drinking sugar water. It's a little less hunger. Not getting quite that feedback of that ultra sweet foods. Yep. And I will tell you that any of my performance athletes are like, as soon as their race is done, or as soon as they're like, I cannot look at another gel. Like I've done one of these every 20 minutes on every training run, and I will never look at them again until I'm back in a phase where I need to eat intra.
No, that makes a lot of sense. Like you said, it still comes down to food choice, right? It's okay. Are gels the tasty? I've actually never had one, so I can't speak on that. I just hearing carbohydrate powder it doesn't sound very, I can't imagine it's very tasty. Yeah, maybe I'm sure they do some things that make it taste at least decent. But yeah, you're right. Okay, obviously now if we're going to like candy or something, okay, now that's where we're going to tip into, okay, that's going to be really hard to manage that there. So that makes a lot of sense. So then big picture for you then, so with that training, like I guess on the day, are you going to be tracking calories, or is it just going to be like, hey, I'm just going to, once I actually get to the hike and stuff like that, I'm just going to be like, whatever I can eat kind of situation then?
So typically I would pre-plan. So what I did for the hike in the fall is I actually pre-planned out because it was 20 miles and 8,000 feet of elevation the first day and another nearly 20 miles the second day. So I pre-planned. I want to make sure that I had enough for every 20 minutes, slurp, slurp, chew, chew, drink, drink. In this case, we run into an interesting overlap of, I don't say a rule, but I have a strong preference that if you're on an international trip, that we don't track our food. But how do we do that and also make sure that we're fueling adequately on like this? And also, I don't even know if I'm going to have cell service, to be honest, like half the time. So my plan is, and how we are training, talking to our athletes who are going on this, is that I'm going to pack all those carbohydrates I talked about, whether I'll pack a few extra gels, I'll pack the powders, and that I'm going to be making sure that I'm eating those intra, or drinking 150-gram packet total per hour as we're going. But I'm not tracking my food otherwise, because it fits this international. But I am going to make sure that I'm going to eat as much as I possibly can, to be honest. Like, I don't care if I put myself into a surplus, because it's not really going to be a surplus with 7 days in a row of hiking. That might look like, hey, I'm in town, like maybe the breakfast at the hut we stayed at the night before wasn't quite that robust for somebody gluten-free, dairy-free. I'm going to go pick up a few extra. I might pick up a candy bar. I might pick up something that I can eat to add some additional fuel on top of it. And my biggest thing is, don't stop eating. You probably still not going to be able to eat enough when you look at the cumulative effect over that time frame, just making sure that it's carbohydrate based.
Yeah, it's almost like you are just like, I guess at that point, then what would be even more important is just like timing and regularity of eating
Yep.
versus worrying about exact calories. Cause like you said, you're just going to be expending so much energy that it's probably just make sure you get fuel in essentially at that point and just eat regularly versus, hey, I need to eat 2,600 calories. Cause at the end of the day, you probably don't exactly know how much you're actually expending and everything like that anyways. It would be hard to micromanage that. And then just eat enough. So you're not concerned about, and again, I don't even know what you would have access to. I guess you wouldn't necessarily have access to, I'm thinking like a burger and fries or something. Like you're probably not going to have access to that type of stuff.
So I will say this is a little bit more of a trip
Okay.
where you go hut
So
to
maybe
hut to hut and they feed you breakfast, they pack you a lunch, and then the next hut feeds
Beautiful.
you dinner and packs you breakfast. So they're going to pack us 3 meals a day. The biggest thing is if I can eat a decent amount of what's going on to those meals. I know our athletes who can eat gluten and dairy are going to be fine. I've seen photos. They're a pretty solid like 800 to 1,000 calorie meal each time. Great. Biggest things that we're eating in the in-between, so that did you eat some snacks between when we left the hut to lunch? Did you eat every hour between when we left the hut to the next stop? And then we're going to be a good spot. And a couple of them, we do traverse through some towns where you can get that croissant or that baguette in addition to. So I think the fuel availability is going to be far better than any other hike I've ever done versus about 40 miles in the wilderness in New Hampshire where you're just like, okay, if I didn't pack my 6,000 calories, I do not have 6,000 calories to eat.
That's where you'll need to be a little bit more strategic, but it sounds like you'll have plenty of fuel, which is good. Again, that definitely helps out. Do you worry about protein at all? Are you concerned about that? Again, maybe with all things considered, you're not. What does that kind of look like?
I would say worry is probably not the word I would use. Do I think about it? Yes. Is my goal to prioritize it? Sure. Am I going to pack beef jerky or protein powder? Absolutely not. My goal would be like, hey, if we're at the hut and I can get an extra like serving of chicken, great. Because for me, I know I'm going to feel a lot better. I will say we've just talked about like how much carbohydrate intake we have to take. Making sure you're still getting like a decent minimum amount of fat and protein is actually going to help a little bit with that. Yes, you are taking those carbs in during your workouts, but you definitely just feel better with little protein and fat along with it over the course of the day too. So yes, will be thinking about it, but not to the point that I'm going to eat something that I really don't want to eat or pack in order to hit it. My goal is like if I can get a decent serving breakfast, lunch, and dinner, I'm going to be fine.
You're probably going to get enough. And then again, it's a big picture. Like, all right, it's a week. It's not like it's a month. You're going to be well fueled as well too, based on what you said. So it's once, I guess, if you were to start to stack those things, like, hey, this is going to be a month-long thing. You don't know where you're going to get all your food at. So, okay, now, you're probably going to be a little bit more, like you said, not necessarily worried, but you're going to focus a bit more on making sure you get in enough protein at that point. Because at the end of the day, from like a muscle loss standpoint, that's, again, you're in a deficit, not eating protein, not like longer time. That's where it's really going to start to add up there over time.
I think the magnitude exactly makes a lot of sense. And the second thing I'd add too is that we are doing it to finish. We're not, there's called an ultra Tour de Mont Blanc where it's like an ultra run, which I would never do. But yeah, I'm not gonna say never say never. I'm never gonna run 100 miles.
You're like, wait a minute, don't hold me to that.
I try not to do an absolute, but I'll be honest, like that's pretty absolute. In that scenario, if I was planning to like run this race where I'm trying to hit in a certain time or make sure I'm not performance, I'm gonna track all that food beforehand. But given we're like, hey, we just have to finish these segments day by day and we have time to do it, I'm just making sure I'm eating intra. Like I'm not trying to, so that we can. Does that make sense? Like,
yeah, no, absolutely. What about any supplements that you're taking right now, whether it's just in general, but then also, are you going to bring any on this?
I actually probably will bring magnesium on the trip, just keeping some GI regulation in place. The last thing you want to do, especially if you're going to be introducing some new foods, is having some GI issues or having some constipation on trail. That would be unpleasant. I will be bringing magnesium. Everything else is not worth our weight limit in the packing.
Yeah.
And I guess technically, if you would count electrolytes in there, I'm counting electrolytes as intra, but I will be bringing the carb powders. If you do performance carb powders, they do have like roughly 300 to 500 milligrams per serving too, which is about what I found for me per hours. Like 300 to 500 is my sweet spot for my sweat rate and replenishing. If I go too low, I feel like shit. And if I go too high, I feel like the pill's ready to boy the next day because I have so much water retention.
Yeah, that's fine. So for you, it just comes down to, okay, it's not worth bringing anything else. And when you look at performance related stuff, like you said, carbs, electrolytes, caffeine. So I don't know if you're going to take creatine, but again, it's okay. It's a week. Do you really need, it's not going to be any, creatine's not going to give you that short-term like performance benefit like something like caffeine would. Beta alanine, but is that even going to be worth what you're doing? Probably not. So there's really not anything out there. Caffeine though, is that something that like coffee you guys have or anything like that? Or
oh, I sure hope so. I actually I have in my shopping cart right now a couple. I'm not planning on bringing a bunch of gels, but I am planning on bringing a handful that have 100 milligrams of caffeine in it because I am a caffeinated person. And just in case, or let's just say that they do lattes and they only have dairy milk and I'm not a black coffee drinker, I just want to have the like option so you don't have that caffeine withdrawal coming on.
So if black coffee was your only option, you would not do it.
The good news is they'll probably have maple syrup, so I'll probably drown it in some maple.
It's hilarious. Hey, more calories, more calories.
Yeah. I also don't have nerve feeling in my face. So I usually do iced everything. So if I drink something too hot, I can burn my tongue before I know that I've something that's too hot. So I don't usually do hot beverages.
So what does your training look like leading up to this? Like what is from like a resistance training standpoint? And then just obviously I'm assuming a lot of just volume in terms of like cardio maybe, but yeah.
Okay, I actually have one more thing to add to what I'm bringing as a performance supplement, and then we'll transition. Okay, this is not something you would necessarily consider a supplement, but what is the number one thing outside of carbs that we need for recovery?
Protein, I'm assuming.
No, sleep.
Sleep. Okay.
Okay, sorry. I really thought.
Man, you set me up. I see what you did there. You set me up to. No, I'm just kidding. But okay, yeah, no, sleep, absolutely, yeah.
So the one bougie purchase that I'm like, this is making the miss is making the list because I've done a couple hikes, and the issue is that you're sleeping in a room with 14 people, and if you're somebody who has a very in-depth sleep routine, and you go now, I'm sleeping in a bunkhouse with 14 to 16 other people. It was really tough. I didn't sleep a wink on that 40-mile hike because there was a kid underneath the bunk underneath me, was talking in his sleep all night. He finally fell asleep, then his sister started talking in his sleep, and I'm just like sitting there. So I bought expensive, but a sleep mask, because I always sleep with sleep mask, but with a built-in white noise.
Oh, nice.
And I've tested it a couple times. I'm like, this is the one thing it has to make the trip is like, if I hear everybody breathing, I don't even hearing my husband breathe at night because I use a white noise machine. So like hearing 16 other people breathe that aren't my husband, like that's a no-go. So I do have that on my like must pack. I've tested it. It works amazing. I'm very excited to have that for the hikes. So.
Yeah, no, that's actually super nice. Because not only that, but then I'm assuming you're changing sleep every time it's like a different place. There's changing where you sleep. It's like no matter what, it's like that change in sleep where you're sleeping, like your sleep is just not going to be as deep when you switch that up. So if you're doing that every single night, you already aren't going to be getting good sleep. So I think that's awesome. And it's comfortable to sleep in and everything like that.
Yeah, it's got the speakers it kind of wraps around your head, and the speakers are about the size of I don't know, the diameter of a tennis ball, but they're flexible. So you can definitely side sleep on it. It's some anti-eye mask. I've been using them for 5 years and they're A+ for blackout. Plus then having now the white noise piece, I was like, this is a must pack.
Yeah. And I definitely think that if you start doing it for a week, it's going to catch up to you. But I think in the short term, if like you had a night or two of sleep like that, like you probably would be going off adrenaline and you'd be feeling fine. I'm sure it would catch up eventually, and who knows what kind of risk you'd be putting at. But yeah, a week, when you start doing that, that will definitely start to add up over time. Cool. Yeah. I guess move on to the training side of things. What does that kind of look like?
Yep. Training side for the currently still lifting 4 days a week, 2 uppers, 2 lowers, and then hitting 2 to 3 zone 2 hiking-ish sessions per week, whether it's a hike or a treadmill hike. And this is just a cardio base building block to making sure, hey, like you're getting that number of sessions up per week, building up to 180 minutes of zone 2. And then 16 weeks out, which is that April 13th cutoff I was talking about earlier, it's where we get into the rubber hits the road. So we are going to be doing things like tread hills where if you have access to hiking, great, go hike a mountain. I will not because I'll be back in Texas. So that's going to look like doing some incline walking, starting at zone 2 and then adding in some super high incline. So you're getting your heart rate up, 2 minutes on, 1 minute off, and getting some undulation here. And I'm going to be honest, this training program was written by a gal on my team named Laura, and she does all the things for our like big ultra runners, trail runners, and preps people for these kind of like activities. So she's written this training plan. I just input my thoughts on the carbohydrates. And we're going to be doing tread hills. And also if you're in flatlands, like I will be, you need to be able to train the downhill piece because you're not just hiking up the mountain, you're hiking down the mountain.
Yeah, and that's a huge part too. That's going to make you sore as hell probably too.
Yes. So you can't just use the treadmill and the step mill, because those are only up modalities, plus they're very even, right? You're taking the exact same steps. You don't have that proprioception. You're not trying to walk on like gravel or loose roads. So a couple things that we are going to be making are people who are living in flatlands training who can't train trails are going to be like box step overs. And this is where you're like up, over, turn around, up, over, down. So you're like having that quad control on the way down. And oh God, like I feel like week one starts with like 20 minutes. And then by the end of it, I'm going to do like over an hour and a half of box step overs. I'm going to hurt.
Man,
I
that's
know.
you got to make it sounds like it gets more specific as it gets
Yes.
closer, obviously. But yeah, sorry, go ahead.
And then one other thing that you put in there is just a big quad, we call it the quad blow up day. So if you can find a way to do a shit ton of downhill, that's what we're going to do. So last year I had the opportunity, because Matt and I had to go stay in a hotel for a thing that happened to be really good timing for the trip, is it was a 10-story hotel, and I rode the elevator up, walked down 10 flights of stairs, rode the elevator up, walked in. This was in Texas too, so very flat. And I just did that for an hour and a half, where I just went down 10 flights of stairs over and over and over again to really train that downhill. And it helped. It certainly helped. And so when you think about the training plan that you're implementing, you want to make sure, one, that the volume matches like where volume ladders up to where it's going. And also we have a number of days that are back to back, because it'd be Friday, Saturday, Sunday. It's gonna feel like a little bit like a part-time job by the time we get, especially in those last 10 weeks leading up to it, but it's got to prepare you for going for 7 days hard in a row.
What if somebody can't dedicate all that time to it? What's the adjustment that you guys would potentially make there?
Yeah, so as I'll quote Laura here, she said, if you can get 80% of the training plan done, you're going to be in a good spot. I think the longest day gets up to 3 hours. And so some of it's just having to make it like a priority too. And I say this, hey, if you can get done at least 2 of those 3 days back to back, we're going to be in a decent spot. The last thing I want to do though is have somebody come into the trip unprepared. I'm like, you just paid a lot of money to be here, and I don't want you to have to bail because your fitness wasn't there yet. And so if we can do the best we can to manage that heart rate, to test those like kind of time on feet pieces, it's kind of the same as though if you had asked me a question of a marathon runner and you're like, hey, I know you want to run a marathon, but you're not going to dedicate the time to do the training runs or do some of the training runs, like maybe we need to downgrade our expectations. In this case, these 15 people have already paid and booked to go do this thing, and they're going to, thankfully I've got one of the gals local to me, and so we're meeting up to do some training hikes together, hikes in Texas. We're going to do some training together in Texas, but we don't want to get outside the mountain, so we don't really have the option to not be ready.
Yeah, kind of pros and cons, and hey, this is what you're getting yourself into, and you don't want to get stuck up there either. What about like weight training? What I'm assuming, is that going to decrease as you get closer to it?
Oh, significantly. So the way that we have our training program set up is 2 upper lower days and 2 upper body days and 2 lower, but one with a little bit more glute emphasis and one with a little more quad. So instead of a typical 4-day split, we changed the 2 leg days up to be like 70-30 and 30-70 glute, quad, glute, because we have a lot of people doing this kind of training. So I have everybody drop our quad day period, like that goes away. And then you do your 2 uppers and the glute specific day to add that balance to all this quad intensive work that we're doing. And a lot of the glute day also has ankle mobility. It also has a couple like hip mobility pieces in there to help prep for that, because we have a ton of people who are runners and hikers and cyclists. And so we drop down to 2 days a week. And then that glute day is as far from that 3-day training block in a row. It's like the glute day is Tuesday and the 3-day training block is Friday, Saturday, Sunday.
So 2 up, you keep 2 upper and then a lower body in, right? Any like plyometric type stuff or anything like that you have to do?
Yeah. So in that glute day is plyometrics as well. So we've got, right now we're doing actually weighted jumps, really helping people work on the explosivity, but not just the explosivity, also descent too, because I think especially as you've probably seen some studies of female athletes, a lot of them tear their ACLs or do those things because they're not controlling for the comeback to ground. You got the explosivity up and we're not prepared to hit the ground. And so training that explosivity in both explosivity and then the control in the landing has a lot of carryover. So we've got those, we've got plyometrics that go laterally. We have all sorts of plyos to kind of prep that lower body to be ready to do some of these explosive activities, or prepping for, I've got loose footing, I set my foot on a rock separately, like how do I adjust quickly? So yeah, so it's definitely a little less hypertrophy intensive because we're making room for the accessory work that you need to have done.
Yeah, I'm assuming less hypertrophy for the lower body, but I'm assuming upper body you could keep it fairly similar in terms of like hypertrophy and stuff like that.
Actually, when you adequately fuel in a performance maintenance phase, a lot of our athletes tend to have some upper body hypertrophy during that phase because we're eating so many carbs. You have that carryover. Oh, maybe we overrested one day. We have a little bit of a surplus. I tend to see clients continuing to hit PRs very close to like peak week on their upper body lifts, just because they have so many readily available carbs in their system because they're having to eat so much that their upper body lifts are just, it's almost like it is like you're in a surplus
Yeah.
on those gains.
That's funny. What, I guess with the deficit too, like what I know you said, obviously like scale weight isn't something that you can like trust as much right now with all the things you have going on. Like, I'm assuming though that over time you're seeing it trend down a little bit at
Yes.
least.
I
Okay.
would say actually it's less trends and I'm seeing it come down. And so what I mean by that is, generally speaking, I know we both use our weekly averages to like assess progress in a deficit. The weekly averages become a little less helpful when you are in having these undulating carb days, because you're going to have a high weigh-in after your day in carb days. What I look for in this progress, and actually it's kind of like the third time I've done this because I have ended up here in Tahoe when I've had my deficit planning, is I look for, am I hitting a new low regularly rather than linear? So I will tell you, like the last 4 weeks of the last 4 weeks have been the exact same average weight. However, measurements have been dropping, and my lowest weight of that week has continued, it's like as a 2-pound delta. And I go, okay, the lowest weight of, even though I had the exact same average weigh in for the last 4 weeks, the lowest weigh in each week, there is a new low that happens. Combine that with, I have hunger cues, measurements are dropping, clothes are fitting differently, photos are different. So if I look at that, I go, okay, hey, things are moving. But again, the goal of when I'm looking at a performance deficit or fueling for performance in a deficit isn't that we're chasing scale progress, because we can't do that, because I just made that trade-off that I'm going to fuel. I can't use a scale as like my end all be all. I also can't expect like the most progress in that phase because I may not fuel appropriately. I may like quote unquote overshoot one day or undershoot one day, plus need adaptations, et cetera, et cetera. And yes, I'm taking the scale as a data point, but it is just a data point. And to be honest, again, like the goal of this was to sustain. And I would say one other thing I didn't talk about earlier is the goal of this deficit really was, how do I get the longest time period out of it to help the SIBO protocol work? So it's never, and I'm gonna be honest, like my quote unquote adherence hasn't been absolutely perfect, but my meal execution has been very good. So like I might be a slightly quote unquote over target a couple days. Again, hunger plays a big piece into this, but I've been keeping, okay, I am only having 3 meals a day. There's no snacking unless it's intra activity, because I'm trying to give that rest and digest function and get some of these tinctures and things that I'm having to take, give them the chance to work. So scale progress, not the most important piece of this, because my goal is to prolong the amount of time that I can spend in inverse way, is like spending so I can let those good bugs repopulate and beat out the bad bugs.
But even if that wasn't the case and you were doing a deficit, like you obviously, like you almost can't be overly aggressive with it anyways, because you have to fuel. And so unfortunately it's like, you just can't be in that big of a deficit anyways. Even if it was just for whatever reason, you would have to be in a deficit for performance, even though, again, come back to what we said earlier, you wouldn't recommend this in most situations there. Cool. Well, yeah. So I think real quick, I do want to touch on the SIBO side of things, because you said that this has happened to you in the past. So I'd be curious, like, based on, I guess maybe just give a little brief background on like how often it's happened. And then I would just be curious to hear about some learnings around it. And then maybe some things that you would do differently moving forward, like with this. And if there's some things like that, you're like, all right, hey, this is I think you said maybe the third time. Don't quote me on that. I could be wrong on that, but are there things now that you're like, okay, moving forward, I'm not going to do this again, et cetera. So I'd be curious to hear a little bit more about that.
Okay. Yeah. First of all, I will say I'm not a SIBO expert. I'm just a person who has a few times. So SIBO a lot of people get it after they've had some sort of traumatic GI event. In my case, I had some really intensive injuries in high school that caused I had to have my whole face reconstructed and had my jaw wired. Couldn't drink liquids for a long time, was a problem. And so that has culminated in a number of GI issues. And if you guys have listened to any of the episodes Jeff and I have done before, I detailed out like how I got into the industry. It's because of those things. So that catalyst of having significant amount of antibiotics has given me some GI issues for a long time. And beat it back in early 2015, 16-ish for the first time. And then it came back with a vengeance, my last build in 2024, 25 season. Again, I do think that part of that is because my carbohydrate needs are so high in that phase for myself, just like relative to the average female client, like my build calories tend to end up being around 3,000 by the end of the build, which is a lot for somebody who is 5'4", 140. So had to go through the protocol last early spring of 25, but I wasn't here in that time frame, so I didn't do a performance deficit. I just did a deficit, and the protocol worked really well. Hindsight 2020, I didn't realize that the protocol just happened to coincide with me being in a deficit. And so this year, when those symptoms came back mid-build, after I had done the big hike in the fall, I'm like, okay, perfect. I'll just redo all the supplements I did, which usually I worked really well to do a non-antibiotic regimen. Last year I worked with my doctor. There's actually 3 kinds of SIBO, or 3 kind of dominant, like methane dominant, carbon dioxide dominant, et cetera. So like I worked with my doctor to do a tincture, an herbal protocol that worked for the kind that I had. Worked great in spring of 2025. Fast forward to fall of 2025, after doing those crazy carb loading for the hikes and then transitioning straight from there into a build, I started having like symptoms recurrence. And for me, because I have the kind of requires me to I just like burp all the time. Like it's terrible. Like it is very uncomfortable because by the end of after dinner, it'll feel like I'm just super bloated. And then I'm like trying to lay down at night and you're just like belching every 20 to 30 seconds, which is not cute.
That sucks. Yeah, that sucks.
Yeah, it's a very, very unpleasant feeling. And so I basically got to do this again.
Yeah.
And this time I did the herbal route, nothing was working. And then I did 2 rounds of antibiotics, and my doctor's like, I think your carbohydrates are just too high. I would just think we're trying to like shoot a BB gun at a freight train right now, because your carbohydrate load is just so high that you're feeding everything, because your gut microbiome feeds off of all that like fiber and carb substrate. So at that point, once we had that conversation, I was like, so I went into it, I was like, okay, I have to stop my build. Like this needs to go away, because I know that I've got this 16-week training plan coming up that I will be eating the most carbs again all summer long. And at that point in January, I was like, okay, bailed out of my build, dropped carbs under 200. I pulled fats up as high as possible because I didn't really want to drop my calories that low, but I had to like, what's the maximum I can eat while keeping carbs? Not that 200 is a magic number. It just seems to be what has worked for me in the past. And I like pulled protein and fat up as high as possible without causing GI distress. And that was like where I've landed for the last 10 weeks. And it has gone much better as soon as I was able to pull down that substrate that the bad bugs are feeding off of. So it's not ideal, but it's definitely worked out a little bit better. Is it the most optimal macro split for body composition perspective? Absolutely not. But is it helpful for the phase of going through this gut healing process? Yes.
Man, yeah, that's tough spot to be in. So I guess then for you, like moving forward now, what are some things that you're like, okay, it seems like you have an idea of maybe when it creeps up, what happens. So again, I think it ultimately comes down to like your trade-offs, what you want to do. I'm sure there's still some things that you're like, all right, I really need to watch this. And these are some things that I want to work on. And again, maybe things that you're like, all right, moving forward, I can't do that. And I need to work around that specifically.
Yeah. So a couple things I'm doing now that I wasn't doing before is I have introduced a lot of fermented foods to try and keep feeding the good gut guys. I'm hoping that helps. To be honest, like this is going to be an N of 1 experiment to be like, all right, if I have 4 to 7 servings of fermented foods a day, that's like sauerkraut, kimchi, kombucha, some fermented dairy-free yogurts, kefir, dairy-free as well. My goal is to keep that up throughout the next, I'll say forever, but my goal is to not let off the brakes on that piece and to hopefully help when I'm eating all these carbs in training. But I'm not thinking that it's probably not going to make a recurrence. That's a lot of negatives. If it makes a recurrence, I am prepared for that to happen. And what I will do next time is probably and rather than try and continue to do the tincture protocol in a build or at maintenance calories, I may have to undulate that back and then probably reassess like what does a performance phase goal look like for me, because that's a pretty big trade-off. Like having to go through a gut protocol once a year because I'm doing these big performance phases is a question I have to ask myself, and I'm not certain. I can't tell you what the answer is right now, but I think if we see that recurrence again in the fall, and to be honest, I don't want to be in a deficit again. Like that's not fun. Just because I can doesn't mean I want to. I don't want to have to pull those calories back down, especially have a very full dance card all the way through the end of the year with some travel and football and all the fun things that come along with fall. So yeah, the short answer is I will be keeping a lot of those good gut practices up in terms of fermented foods and keeping digestion as best I can. But if it makes a recurrence, then I do a come to Jesus talk with myself about, hey, what are the trade-offs and is this worth it? Because you don't want to keep doing this. It's not pleasant.
No, that's what I was wondering too, if there is anything or if it just keeps popping up. It's like, all right, what do I have to do? I'd be curious. I'm just like thinking of some things here. Just again, I'm no gut health expert either. And again, I'm sure you've looked into these things, but does it obviously, it sounds like it correlates with like higher stress load, like on your, like, it's like when you're doing a bunch of training, you have a lot going on. You're also, like you said, you're really like doing a lot from like a food nutrition perspective. I know you also like to travel, and it's like all those things are just like, it's just which one is the big one, and is it a combination? I'm sure these are all things that you've already asked yourself, but I'm just like, these are things that are popping in my head.
No, I think you hit the nail on your head. I mean, honestly, we live a high stress lifestyle in general. I do my best to mitigate it. Like sleep is the number one thing that I'm always working on, but I also can't. I'm not saying I can't. I never say I can't. But we also travel a lot. I usually regularly post this calendar on my wall of the amount of nights that I slept at home, and I'm verging on 50% this calendar year of not being at home. But I love to see family. I love to go visit people. I have the ability to do so. I'm going to. And there's a lot of like trade-offs there. I will say non-negotiable for me is I'm not going to not go travel and visit family. Might I exert a little bit more control over my food while traveling in order to do these things? Potentially, yes. But I think the stress factor is rather large. Being a small business owner, there's a lot of things that go into it, and you're constantly thinking about, what do I need to do? How do I best service my clients? How do I make sure that I'm bringing in new clients? How do I keep that business healthy? And it's multifactorial, right? So is it that I will never do a performance phase again? Probably not. But it's like, how do I look at that? Because is that the straw that broke the camel's back, when I have in prior years had all those same stressors, but less performance phases in there?
What do you track? Like I know you do, but I'm just be curious. Like HRV, resting heart rate. Do you track those things pretty consistently?
Yep.
Do you see like does any trends with that around it or anything?
Not on the SIBO side, but I do absolutely throughout the year see that. As somebody who's a little bit more of a hyper adaptive metabolism, my resting heart rate changes dramatically throughout the year. Like it is a 12 BPM variance. So when you think about, hey, if you eat more food, you move more, you fidget more, you do all the things, like even in my higher cardiovascular seasons, when I'm eating the most, my resting heart rate, which theoretically should be much lower because my cardio is higher, tends to be higher because I'm just vibrating more. Like I'm just fidgeting the most. So I think peak build, my resting heart rate's like 55, and then it can get down to 40, 41, 42 in this season. So it's a very higher variance than I would say most people's are. HRV has been pretty static though throughout, unless have a few beverages, a few nights, and it plummets. Push yourself on a big building block. That definitely is very responsive, but I would say my resting heart rate is very correlative to my nutrition and where it is.
Yeah, I've noticed that too. It's like when you're in a deficit, it definitely goes down. And then when you're out of a deficit, it tends to go up. Like you said, just probably just more neat. Like you're just fidgeting more, eating more, all those things. Because I definitely feel like it correlates with like your total daily energy expenditure. I think the higher it is, it's like it's just naturally going to be a little bit higher there. Cool. Anything else from navigating performance in a calorie deficit that like you think is super valuable for people or anything? Because I feel like we went through a lot of that kind of just going through your training and like what you're dealing with, but I'm just curious if there's anything that you want to let clients know about or that you work on specifically in that situation.
I would say if you can separate those phases, you are going to have a better outcome for both your performance and your fat loss phase. Like ideally, this specific implementation of eating carbs in a deficit fits a very narrow population, and that population is one who maybe like lives up in the mountains year round, and they're like, I'm not going to not have ski days or snowshoeing days or whatnot in potentially a most optimal calorie deficit season. That population also has done a regular calorie deficit. If you don't know how your body responds at a calorie level in we'll call it a traditional fat loss phase, where you are just eating the same calories day in, day out, we need that data to know how to do a performance deficit. If you don't have that data, you are missing the ability to navigate that because we don't know if those targets are correct for you. And if you have a big chunk of the apple you're trying to take a bite out of, then you need to figure out your schedule in order to do these separately. The people who I have who do the performance deficits are usually like, okay, I came off the bill. They're in my shoes, to be honest. So I'm happy with my scale weight. Wouldn't mind being a little bit leaner, but they're not looking to lose 10, 15, 20 pounds. They're like 5 to 7 would be nice over a time period because I know that I'm managing some of these other factors. Or for the male clients, we'll call it like 7 to 15. That would be the caveat. It's like, hey, and if you have bigger goals than that, or you want strong expectations, just don't. Figure out, let's look at your calendar. Let's go, okay, let's push performance this way. Let's push fat loss this way. Because if we want to take big chunks of the apple and make big strides, we we just can't do them both at the same time.
It sounds like, so then like the situations where this would happen would be in your situation, there's some sort of health thing that we need to work on potentially, right? Mm-hmm. Or like you said, there's that kind of person they are body comp focused and they like to go do things like hiking or snowboarding or things like that. And they're not going to not take time out of the year to not do those things. Those would be the most common situations that you would see this pop up, right? Outside of that, there wouldn't be anything else from that perspective.
I wouldn't say there's a lot of pros to it. It's just going, if you are a person who is a highly active, we pick your least active season of the year that makes the most sense for fat loss and go, okay, I'm not going to tell you not to do XYZ, but we might pull back on the intensity and fuel appropriately so that we can manage a fat loss phase. But I'll say, even if I presented this to clients who are in those shoes and we've talked about the pros and cons, and 90% of the time they're like, yeah, you know what? I think I'm just going to do some basic zone 2 cardio and get my steps in so that I can get that bigger chunk of the apple. I want to lose that 10 to 15 pounds in this fat loss phase and get out of it, versus knowing the mind duck it is to spin your wheels because you're like, I don't know what's going on with the scale. And so generally speaking, I would say this is the fallback if you're in the position where it doesn't quite make sense for your schedule. But I wouldn't make it a primary option.
Yeah. So I play hockey once a week. It's roller hockey. It's not, I'm like, and it's once a week, but like in my fat loss phases, like I'll have to account for that. I'll usually have that be my like higher calorie day. Like you said, really focus on sleep. And then obviously like really watching the rest of your training. What does that look like? Watch, like from a cardio perspective, like you said, maybe a little bit more zone 2, lower intensity type stuff versus higher intensity interval type stuff. Things like that can be super helpful there. And just meal timing too, I think is important. Making sure you time that around that workout on that day as well too, kind of like you do right now. Really focusing on the timing of things, I think is super important. Cool. Anything else on this or anything that you want to go over? You feel like we missed or anything like that?
I really feel like we covered it. And we covered a lot of topics as always. We meander a little bit, but I'm glad to be back.
Yeah, we like went through everything, just not necessarily in like perfect order, but we hit on everything, right? Like we got through your training and then talked about SIBO and then some digestion tips for surpluses. Like we did that earlier as well too. So I feel like we hit everything there. So yeah, we got to it all, just worked around it a little bit. But I feel like I don't know, sometimes just having a natural conversation, I feel is much better than being like, all right, let's go on to this topic now. Just let the conversation flow where it does. And that's what I was planning on doing with you since you've been on so many times now. It's like, we can just let the conversation flow versus feeling like it needs to be super structured.
Yeah, it helps when we're friends, right? Like we can have the conversation without going through the outline, and we'll get there eventually.
Anything that you're excited about or coming up on your end or anything like that?
Oh, there's always things I'm excited about, but I can't talk about it yet. It'll be, if you follow on the Instagram, I will be doing some things in the next month, but I just can't talk about it quite yet.
Oh man, maybe I can get something out of you when we stop recording potentially. Cool. And again, obviously you'll be getting ready for your hike here leading up to that. When would that end up being then again? When is it?
Second week of August.
August. Okay. Gotcha. So that'll come up quick there. So cool, Laura. Again, people are probably familiar, but in case there's some new listeners and things like that, where can they find you and where can they find out more about you?
Yep. So I'm on Instagram at Laura Savino or Elevated Pursuit Nutrition. So both those are a great place. Launchpad, you'll find us and then click
Go from there. Awesome, Laura. We'll appreciate your time and we'll chat with you next time.
Look forward to it.